All right, wouldn't you know it? The moment I start filming, and I mean like the countdown was going, that the camera was going to be on, a police helicopter just showed up. And I think it's just one, it might be two, but they're flying over my little housing development here and they are talking over the loudspeaker about how there's I think they, hard to hear, but I think they said a felony suspect with and given a description. So I'm going to keep going because I got shit to do and I don't want to wait for that not to happen. And I'm an audio engineer, so hopefully you guys won't hear that. But let's see if I open the door. You might be able to hear it. Yeah, they're just doing circles. Anyways, I'll let them worry about that. Today, what we're doing, it is the question of the day. And today's question is, how did you book your first national tour? So we'll try not to let the police helicopters distract us too much here. But yeah, how did you book your first national tour? So there's a couple ways that came about. Um, I had my first band. I had a few bands. So I had my band in high school. We were called Clear Black Glass. Terrible name, great band. And then after high school, I joined this already established band called Protohuman as their bass player, and we were very skinny puppy meets Nine Inch Nails, a little bit of Radiohead thrown in. I wasn't the main songwriter, but I loved industrial music. I loved what those guys were doing. Um, and they'd been rehearsing and writing music, but hadn't gone live yet. And I joined that band, and we took it live and had a great time with it. But then I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to have my own band. Um, so I mentioned this in another one of these questions, but I started my own band. It was called Human Factors Lab, and I wrote all the music and wrote an entire album, put people together. Actually, a couple of the guys that were in Protohuman, one of my dear friends to this day, Darren, a few other guys, we got together and did that. And then Darren and I were like the two main songwriters, and we were like each of us would write our own songs, but we were writing very different styles. And so it eventually split into two different bands. And he kind of went and took his songs and what they were doing, and they started a new band called Flirting Through Violence, which they were phenomenal at what they were doing. I'm second guessing this helicopter decision. This might not, maybe I should have waited because it's getting worse out there. Anyways, so yeah, Flirting Through Violence, they were just phenomenal. They were doing great stuff. And I went on with Human Factors Lab, and we did a lot of stuff in the South Florida local scene. We branched out regional, and then I remember our first out of state like tour. It was more of a mini tour. We booked that. Like the question was, how did you book it? We booked it through networking. So MySpace was the thing at the time, and we were friends with other bands all over the country. There was this band called Absinthe out of Rhode Island, and we become friends with them. They actually did a remix. If you can look up Human Factors Lab on Spotify or Apple Music, and there's a remix album called Paper that we put out, and there's a remix on there from Absinthe. And so yeah, we did that tour. So they were in Rhode Island. We went up there with them. They invited us up, and so we played this place called The Living Room with them and another band called Bile, which some of you might remember in New York City. They were in the Strangeland movie. Really, really great band, and we were super excited to like go up to, out of Florida, not just out of Florida, but up to like New England and perform with Bile, this legendary industrial band. So we did that, and it was great. We had a lot of fun. Maybe like a year later, I did it again, and we went up and we were doing a lot of stuff. There was this other Orlando-based band called Lunatic Candy Creep. Again, another just fucking amazing band. I kind of adopted their bass player and their drummer, and we put this tour together with both bands. And it's called the Strategies for Tragedy Tour, which, careful when you're naming your tours, because it was a fucking disaster. And God, we talk about there not being failures, like failures, it's a gift. I got a lot of gifts on that tour. It was a huge failure. But fuck did I learn a lot. And that tour, I booked myself, and I learned what it was and what it took to really book your own tour and call venues. We did this really cool like movie release party in New York City for the Devil's Rejects, and it was the first time we pulled into New York, and first time we'd been to New York City, first time we'd played New York City. Um, and first time we ever saw, like, we saw it in movies, but to see like the posters that are, like glued onto the construction and onto walls of buildings and stuff. And then sure enough, there it was for a few blocks of the venue. There was our picture and there was our name. And we were doing this, this Rob Zombie Devil's Rejects party. And some of the guys from the movie are there. And it was cool, man. It was really cool. But that tour as a whole, disastrous. The tour itself is a pressure cooker. And, I made so many mistakes. And I mean, from our transportation and our van blew up in the first week, and we wound up like taking cars and then renting a van when we got up north, and made a lot of mistakes that you try not to do. So vehicle troubles, and we were just trying to make it work. Venues, we didn't have deposits on half of them, but we left anyways. And then those venues wound up canceling on us, and we didn't have contracts with pretty much anybody. We were just like, okay, yeah, you're saying you book us. And we show up and they're like, we don't even know who that promoter is, and these are things where you hear of shady people in the music industry, but when you're a young band and you think you know what you're doing, and then you find out really quickly, like we'd always dealt with promoters we knew in Florida, and they're like, yeah, we'll put you on the show, and you take them at their word, and you show up and you do the show and you get paid and everybody's happy. I mentioned in, a previous question a couple days ago, this guy Greg at the Culture Room, who was really supportive, and that's who we were used to dealing with, really good people like that. So when we got out in like the real world and we realized like, oh, not everybody wants your best interest or really cares about you as a band. So ultimately I take the blame for that tour falling apart, but I learned a lot, and it was a lot of rookie mistakes that I made, because I wanted to do it myself. I was like, I can do this. It's easy, right? It wasn't easy. That tour ended with us going to NAMM in Indianapolis, and there was a lot of internal fighting between the members, and we wound up, me and the keyboardist got kind of stranded in Indianapolis and took a train home while all our gear in the van left with the rest of the guys. And I'm still, I'm still friends with most of them to this day, but it's one of those things where bands are like relationships, and ex-band members can be like ex-girlfriends or ex-relationships. And there was a couple years we didn't talk, and then we buried the hatchet and realized, like, wound up working together later on and doing some really amazing stuff. So that was the first tour, and that's how I booked it myself. I called venues, I emailed, I sent out press kits. I was persistent. I, used my network and looked up things on the internet and just kind of DIY that tour. And then our next tour, we did it again through networking. There's a band called Synergy 67, and we got on with them, and they had some shows already booked, and we came up and we booked some of them too. And again, it was both our bands kind of acting as our own booking agent, so to speak, and just doing it ourselves, real DIY. And that tour was phenomenal. We love those guys. We did a remix for them. They did a remix for us. But we learned another valuable lesson, because we did that tour in February in the northern Midwest, and we're Florida boys. We showed up in flip flops and shorts. I think our first show was like in Chicago in February. And like, obviously we knew snow existed, but again, it's different when you've never really seen snow before. You've never lived in snow, and now you're touring in snow, and the logistics of that, like, nobody wants to go out in snow. Nobody wants to, we had low turnouts because nobody wants to go to a show when it's negative 10 degrees outside before the wind chill. So we had a couple of really good shows on on that. I remember we played Indianapolis. I think that was the first show, was Indianapolis. And we played at this Lions Club, like a little concert hall that somebody had rented out. And our local opener was a band called Whittle Monsters. And they were all dressed in these, like, it looked like My Pet Monster from the 80s. But they were like dressed as like Muppets, basically. And they were fucking phenomenal. They were so good. And so we did that tour, but our first like real tour, the way we booked that was again through networking. So I'm talking about 4 tours here. 3 of these we did through networking with other bands. There's a lot of power in that. But also the power in that is approaching that. And this is kind of everything, especially in the music business, but I kind of live my life this way. Approaching networking and just people in general of what can I do for this person, not what can they do for me or what can they give me. Every time I meet somebody new, anytime I'm reaching out to somebody, I'm always like, what are you working on? What projects do you have? How can I help? Where can I be useful? And my experience has taught me, if you approach networking from the standpoint of how can you help others, it goes a long way and you get a lot more done. So it was networking. Our first like real big tour was with Mushroomhead. And the way we got on that tour was we had these friends of mine. It was a band called Crossbreed. They were doing amazing stuff out of Florida. They got signed, toured with Rammstein, and we're on like, I don't know if they were on Ozfest. They could tell you better than I could, but they were on like big festivals and big tours, and they were in all the Guitar World and all the music magazines. And I mean, they got signed to Artemis Records, I think it was. But amazing band, amazing performance. I had worked with them. I first met them because they approached me when I had my first studio. I was still in college, and I opened my own recording studio to pay my way through college. And they'd reached out to me, and we started working on what became the New Slave Nation EP. And so we did a lot of the tracking for that there, and we rebuilt some of the tracks. Had a great time, but really got to know those guys and appreciate what they do. And I learned so much from them. They were really just mentors for me, starting off real early. And James, the main guy in that band, to this day is still somebody he's a friend of mine. He's somebody I trust and I converse with. And, we're going to get him on the podcast, so you'll get to meet him and he'll tell you everything he's doing. But, Crossbreed took a hiatus. They just came back out a couple years ago, like during the pandemic. And they're doing like really cool festivals all over the place right now. I know they're doing Wasteland coming up. If you guys haven't been to that, check it out. Check out Crossbreed for sure. Like one of my favorite bands just as a fan, but also, James and Ian and everybody in that band, really good people. So, anyways, James, I met them because they approached me to help them work on that album. And we did that in my studio in Orlando. And then Crossbreed was doing a show in Fort Lauderdale. And if I remember correctly, so this was like December of 2007. And they it was December of 2007. I think they were playing with Dope. They were playing Mushroomhead. And it could have been maybe somebody else on the bill, but I remember those two. And so we went and I went to the show, and James took me backstage and introduced me to Rick Stitch from Mushroomhead, and was basically like, it's the 70s, got this band, Human Factors Lab. You guys got to take them on tour with you. And lucky for me, they did. And, like I said, I've talked about this, I think, in a video I did yesterday. So this may seem a little redundant, not to mention repetitive and redundant. But, so we got real lucky. They took us out on tour. And the way we booked that was literally just that, Now, for that specific situation, we did do what's called a buy-on. We paid the guys from Mushroomhead, their management. We paid a fee to be included in that tour. And at that time, like, we got a lot of shit from that, from the other local bands, where like buying on was really looked down upon. It was almost this like unsaid thing of like you guys weren't good enough to earn your place on that tour. You weren't good enough to just go on the tour. You had to pay to be on the tour. And there's a little bit of truth in that, and there isn't, right? So as far as the not good enough thing, there's truth in that because nobody knew who we were really outside of Florida. If we booked our own tour, we saw this. We did it a couple times. 50 people show up, maybe, if we're lucky, if we have a good promoter and good local support. So we were not bringing numbers. We're not bringing 500 people like Mushroom Head is. There's no way. So yeah, we're nowhere near as good in that sense, right? So what are we offering to that tour? We're going to show up and bring 10 people to Jacksonville, North Carolina. Like, okay. Maybe if we had like just signed a record deal or had a hit record and we're pulling hundreds of people to the show, there'd probably be a different conversation, but that's not what we were doing. So what we brought to the table is we paid to kind of grease the wheel. There's a lot of expenses that go into touring. There is, you're in the black or in the red day one as a national touring band. You're paying for transportation. You're paying for the crew. You're paying band members. You had probably had a huge merch order that you had to put a lot of money down on to get that merchandise that you have to now sell on tour to get your money back and to make profit. If you haven't done the first show, you're not getting paid for the show. So day one of that tour, you're way in the red. So any money that can come in and grease the wheels and get that machine rolling where it's generating money, where you have money coming in on that tour every day, then all the better, But, and so we got a lot of shit in the local scene where people were like, oh, you bought onto that. But it's like, yeah, but if it was that easy, why didn't you buy onto it? Why didn't anybody else? It's not just having the money, it's establishing yourself within a network and knowing who to talk to that's going to take your money. First of all, not anybody can just buy onto a tour. And the second thing is you have to be prepared to, when you buy on, you're able to fulfill that commitment. You're able to logistically take a team of people out and go on tour and perform and fucking bring it where the fans are loving it. The promoters are loving it. Like, you have to fucking bring it. So yeah, we bought on. But think of Ozfest. Every single band you saw on that stage bought onto that. Most major tours, it wasn't them paying out of pocket like we did. It was their labels are paying, But that's what labels did. Labels would buy their bands onto tours. Labels would pay to get their song on the radio or pay to get it on MTV, and a lot of backdoor deals and stuff like that. Where there's a lot of money going around. And that's why you have a lot of bands that you used to hear on the radio and you're like, this is terrible. How the fuck did this band get signed? It's because somebody put in a lot of money is what it is, So yeah, we bought on that first tour and it was one of the best decisions we ever made because we were getting paid. We paid like $4,000 and I think we were out for 6 weeks. And we were getting paid, Mushroom Head was cool enough that in their contract with the venues, they had put in there that we got paid from the venue every night. Now, this doesn't happen now. This was back in 2008. We went out with them in spring of 2008. Nobody does this anymore. Like the national bands are not taking care of their support bands like that. I'd be really shocked if even Mushroom Head did, because it just does now, because it's not done anymore. But at the time, they didn't have to do that, but they put in their payment from the venue, like 300 went to us, which was awesome. They were looking out for us. We made probably $1,000 a night from the merch table. So every single day, our expenses were about $1,000 a day. So profit wise, every day that 300 really came in, because that was kind of our profit margin, where we're around $300 after everybody's paid, transportation, gas, feed everybody, pay all the band members, maybe it wasn't as high as 1,000, but either way, within the first week, we were in the black. We were out of that 400 was paid off. 4,000 was paid off. And for that money, the question again, how did you book that tour? Mushroomhead and their management took care of all the booking. So every contract with every venue was already set. Our name was included. It was on the marquee when we pulled up every day. It was on the, the day sheets backstage. It was on the flyers that were in the local newspapers. It was on the radio station. If anywhere that those ads went, we were included in that ad mat. And you've heard me say ad mat a couple times, just short for advertising material. And so we were included in that ad mat. And we made friends and built fans that we still have to this day. The project now is called Seven Factor, but some of those fans carried over and they're like, oh, this is your band now. This is your project. So there's people I still talk to that I met on that first April 2008 tour with Mushroomhead. That was our first major tour. And and those guys treated us really well. Everybody in that band really treated us well, and they spent time with us. They come and hung out on our bus. They acted as kind of older brothers and mentors of guys that have been doing this a long time, and they were doing this on a much higher level than we were. And they knew that we were new to this. We were rookies, man. We were green. And they, there was a little bit of hazing, like they fucked with us. Like, man, I remember one night we were in, I think Atlanta, Georgia, maybe, and we were on stage. And the venue backstage was 3 stories high, and the dressing rooms were on the 3rd story backstage. And there was these giant pieces of styrofoam all over backstage for some reason, like huge pieces of styrofoam. And so Waylon, who is one of the singers of Mushroomhead, he's got his own band, Killer's Confession now. But Waylon took these pieces of styrofoam and just started throwing them down 3 stories. And the first one hit one of our keyboard players, and she's this tiny, 100 pounds soaking wet. He referred to them as the space hookers. I remember that. But yeah, this piece of styrofoam comes out of nowhere and just nails her and knocks her over. And I look up and there's another one, hits me, and now it's just raining styrofoam. And all of a sudden, the security in the club, they grab Waylon, they kick him, they drag him out of the venue. And he's trying to explain to them, like, we're friends. He's fucking with us. It's like they're hazing us. But he's like, I'm the singer for the headliner. You can't kick me out. And then they realized who he was, and that it's, the hazing like that. If you're a support band and you go out the national and they don't haze you, they don't like you. Like, that's just how it is. Like, these guys were fucking with us, but in a way that really made us feel welcome. And we, like I said, we learned a lot on that tour. We made a lot of fans. We made a lot of money. They invited us back out. So that was spring of 2008. We were back out on tour with them in October of 2008. So yeah, that's the long drawn out story of how I booked my first tour.